Now, from the Pope John Paul II Cultural Center in Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to The World Over Live, and thank you for joining us. We've got a special show for you tonight. Throughout the show, we'll commemorate the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001. EWTN favorite Father George Rutler, pastor of the Church of Our Saviour, was there in Lower Manhattan that day. He'll join us tonight to share his memories of that tragic day and the enduring lessons. We'll also chat with syndicated columnist and author of the new book, Don't Let Your Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, Marybeth Hicks, about some drastic changes she's seeing in American culture and the dangers confronting our kids. If you have a parenting question or a new trend that you've spotted in your children, join the discussion. Give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460 in the U.S. or internationally, 205-271-2980, or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. Let's begin here. It's The Brief, news from the world over this week. In light of the recent health care mandate requiring that virtually all health care insurers provide free contraception and sterilization coverage, the U.S. bishops are repeating their call for a conscience protection law. In a letter to Congress, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, chair of the Bishops' Pro-Life Committee, wrote that in order to qualify for a religious exemption under the new Obama administration requirements, Catholic health providers would have to, quote, fire non-Catholic staff, refuse life-affirming care to non-Catholic people, and devote itself instead to the inculcation of religious values, end quote. Moreover, he said individuals, insurers, and the sponsors of non-employee health plans, such as those for students at Catholic schools, would have no exemption at all. In March, the Respect for Rights of Conscience bill was introduced in the U.S. House. It's sponsored by Republican Jeff Fortenberry and Democrat Dan Lipinski. It has 50 co-sponsors. And National Public Radio is reporting that the Obama Justice Department has stepped up its efforts against pro-life activists. The Ted Kennedy-sponsored Free Access to Clinics Act was passed and signed into law in 1994, but has rarely been enforced, due mostly to free speech concerns. The law restricts the manner in which clinic activists may protest, conduct sidewalk counseling, and even pray. But now, according to the NPR report, the Justice Department has filed 8 civil lawsuits since President Obama took office, compared to just 1 during the 8 years of the Bush administration. A spokesman for the Justice Department says that it takes, quote, seriously its responsibility to enforce the law fully and fairly and in a manner that does not infringe on any First Amendment rights. Another day in court for California's Proposition 8. On Tuesday, the California Supreme Court heard arguments to determine whether backers of the ballot initiative protecting marriage have the legal standing to appeal a federal ruling that overturned the voter-approved measure. Earlier this year, a federal Ninth Circuit panel expressed doubt about their legal standing, but wanted the state Supreme Court to rule on the matter first. The tenor of the justices' questioning this week suggested and seemed to favor the Prop 8 backers. If the court holds that proponents are qualified to appeal, and the Ninth Circuit agrees, the appeals court would then weigh the broader constitutional questions of Proposition 8. Their decision is ultimately expected to be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The California High Court has 90 days to issue an opinion. And the Scottish government has commenced its formal process to consider the legalization of same-sex marriage. During the 14-week consultation period, as it's called, government ministers will hear testimony from interested parties. The bishops of Scotland weighed in almost immediately. After meeting in Edinburgh on Wednesday, they released a statement promising to, quote, strenuously oppose the legislation. They said, quote, no government can rewrite human nature. The family and marriage are built on the union between a man and a woman. That evening, during a Mass for politicians, Cardinal Keith O'Brien repeated those remarks during his homily. He said he will ask members of the Scottish Parliament to accept the true nature of the family and marriage. A bill to legalize gay marriage could be introduced in Parliament as soon as 2013. And the Vatican has vigorously rejected claims that it sabotaged efforts by Irish bishops to report clerical abuse of children to police, and further accused the Irish Prime Minister of leveling an unfounded attack against the Holy See. In July, the Vatican was publicly excoriated and officially denounced by the political leaders in Ireland after a government report detailed clerical abuse in the Diocese of Cloyne. The 15-page statement strongly rejects most of the criticism directed toward Rome, asserting that the suffering detailed in the Cloyne report was caused by the, quote, grave failures in the ecclesiastical governance of the diocese. The Vatican also took umbrage at Prime Minister Enda Kenny's fiery Parliament attack, which they said lacked any proof. The dispute has seriously damaged relations between the Vatican and the staunchly Roman Catholic Ireland. The Vatican has withdrawn its Irish ambassador in protest. And on Thursday at the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul, the Most Reverend Charles Chaput was installed as the new Archbishop of Philadelphia. He replaces Cardinal Justin Regali, who is past the normal retirement age. During the Mass, carried live here on EWTN, Archbishop Chaput repeatedly alluded to the troubles facing the Church in Philly, reminding the faithful to retain their trust in God.
One of the first representations of Jesus we have is the Good Shepherd who carries a lamb on his shoulders. All of us, especially the people of Philadelphia, should keep that image in our hearts in the months ahead, because the Good Shepherd really will bring the church in Philadelphia through this difficult moment in our history to security and joy and a better future.
Archbishop Chaput concluded his statements telling the people in Philly that he loves them as much as any shepherd could love his flock. He inherits an archdiocese in the midst of court hearings over its handling of clerical sex abuse charges. We wish Archbishop Chaput the very best in his new position. If anybody can navigate the rocky waters of this situation and bring all parties to true justice and peace, I know Archbishop Chaput will do it. He'll find a way. And finally, might Pope Benedict visit Cuba in 2012? That's the hope of church leaders in Cuba. Havana Archbishop Jaime Ortega said this past weekend that he personally invited the Holy Father to the island nation during his recent visit to the Pope's summer residence at Castel Gandolfo. 2012 will mark the 400th anniversary of the discovery of Cuba's patron saint, Our Lady of Cobre. This past weekend, Cardinal Ortega led a procession in a months-long run-up to next year's anniversary celebration. Reacting to the invitation to visit Cuba, Ortega said the Holy Father said, God willing, God willing. And of the I Zing, America's cultural decline from muffin tops to body shots, my recent collaboration with Laura Ingraham is still on the New York Times bestseller list. You can get your copy. It's a fun read and a great way to examine the culture. Even the ugly bits of the I Zing is available at bookstores everywhere. But we're not the only ones looking at the culture. When we return, syndicated columnist and author Marybeth Hicks is here to warn you about the threats facing your children. We'll expose and explore her new book, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, and take your calls. But as we go to a break, here's a reflection on the tragedy of 9/11, 10 years later. Stay with us.
That I see is that there's, as evil as that deed was, and for all the personal tragedies that there's been, I see personally more good that has come from it than bad has come from it. And this I have to play with this because this is my faith and this is what I have to see. And just yesterday there was a couple of kids, we were at a rubbish fire, and some kids were saying, asking us questions. Were we there? Did we lose anyone? Keep doing the good work. This never would have happened prior to, never. And that's just locally. And then if you look at the bigger picture, the support from all over the world, and every firehouse became a receptacle for letters and cards and sheets that were banners and messages and quilts and flags, and You name it, it was sent to firehouses. People were giving heartfelt messages. They were calling us heroes, but we were just doing our job.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Faith, family, and freedom all hang together. My first guest tonight worries that those three basic building blocks of society are under assault, and nowhere is that assault more pronounced than among our children. She's author of the new book, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, Confronting the Left's Assault on Our Families, Faith, and Freedom. Would you welcome Washington Times columnist and editor of the e-newsletter Family Events, Marybeth Hicks. Welcome back. Thank you for enduring the monsoon season here in Washington.
Out there.
Yeah, well, you only took on an NFL game, presidential address, and the Great Flood of Washington. So you've made it in one piece.
And the taxi line, and here I am.
Not too bad. Okay, you've got this book, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid. What is the Kool-Aid?
Okay. The Kool-Aid are the messages from the culture that our kids are getting in the educational system, in the educational infrastructure in our nation, and in the media and in the pop culture, which are all sending one message to kids about the way they should shape their beliefs and mold their beliefs. I argue that these are, something I would identify as leftist, but I don't want to go there in this conversation. Mostly it's just that they're beliefs that really don't fit with the Judeo-Christian principles our country was founded on. They certainly don't fit with traditional views of family and faith that we really want to uphold.
No, it's a secularist mindset, this radical secularist mindset.
Yep.
I mean, and that's being generous probably. I mean, it's atheistic at times. We'll get into some of this.
Yep.
You talk about family degeneration and disintegration. Why are people, and why would someone, as you suggest in this book, somehow plot the demise of traditional families?
Well, from a secular point of view, and certainly from a, if you will, a political point of view, it does set the government up to be a great resource instead of family. So that is one of my concerns that I express in the book. But what's interesting is that it's everywhere. Everywhere where our kids experience the culture, they're learning that family is obsolete, that families they form and reform. They don't need a mom and a dad and children. Families can be any group of people that loves each other and cares about each other, but that doesn't necessarily last forever. And so our kids are not growing up to understand the building blocks of a true family, and our society and our culture is dependent on that in order to survive.
If you have a question for Marybeth about a difficulty you're having with your own children or a trend you're seeing in the classroom among your children's friends, give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460 or internationally 205-271-2980 or drop us an email, worldover@ewtn.com. Now, what are you seeing in the educational system that is undermining families, actively undermining the traditional family?
I think the thing that is the biggest concern for us, especially as Catholic parents, is the implementation of the sexuality education training in the public schools. And even recently, this summer, Governor Jerry Brown in California signed into law legislation that will require history and social studies teachers to teach gay history, as in American history from the perspective of gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual people, so that instead of just framing history from the standpoint of what was significant in the past, we're now going to look at history purposefully through the eyes of this kind of prism of dividing people into categories and using part of sexuality as one of those categories. And so the reason that's important is California is the largest buyer of textbooks in the nation. And so all of the producers of textbooks will have to make them California worthy, and then the rest of us will all have to have those textbooks in our classrooms as well. So it is very significant, and it's a way of undermining the traditional family and just sending that message to public school kids and all school kids who, parochial schools as well, that a family is anything that we decide it can be. And so it's definitely undermining a traditional family.
You make the charge in the book that there's also a campaign against God in many ways. And you quote here, younger Americans are dropping out of religion at a high rate. 30 to 40% have none today, as opposed to 5 to 10% a generation ago.
Right.
To what did you attribute that?
Okay, I think it's actually kind of a 1-2 punch. On the one hand, you see in the media, entertainment media, shows like Glee Glee, shows like Family Guy. Very funny, very entertaining, super talented people working on these shows.
But they're not family shows. These are billed as family shows.
But they're not. And when you look at a show like Family Guy, for example, God and Jesus are recurring characters using blasphemous humor, sexual situations, and this kind of stuff. But the creator of that show, Seth MacFarlane, is not just an atheist, he's an anti-theist. He truly wants an eradicated, God. He doesn't want God in our culture at all. Glee, great, talented kids, wonderful show, except for the messages are about Christians are judgmental and religion is not welcoming.
Well, there's a Christian character in Glee, though. There's a Quinn who's a Christian character. What's wrong with
well, in the one season I would let myself watch. Believe me, I couldn't put up with it for too long. The girl who is the head of the Christian group gets pregnant not by her boyfriend but by his friend, and then her parents kick her out of the house because
good Christian behavior.
They're evangelical Christians, so of course they kick her out of the house. And at the end of the season, her mother reunites with her and leaves the father, and it's the judgmental Christian who's viewed as the evil bad guy. And so on the one hand, that's what kids get in entertainment. On the other hand, at school, if you want to make a locker sign for a friend for the football game and put a Bible verse on it, you can't do that because that's a mixing of church and state, and you're promoting your religion among your friends, and you can't do that. So on the one hand, God is not allowed, or God is a joke, and on the other hand, God is judgmental, and so kids get all these messages that are just, of course, that leads them to an irreligious life. They just don't see how it fits into their world at all.
At the same time, you see parenting under assault in the wider culture. We have this mother who was charged with child abuse for putting hot sauce, cayenne pepper, on her son's mouth. I hate to tell you, my poor mother would have been dragged to Child Protective Services years ago. We used cayenne pepper as practically a Raymond, additive. It was like salt on eggs. Yeah, look what happened. Maybe they should have taken her away. I'm kidding, mother. But what's happening here?
Yeah.
Why this emphasis in the culture on, every time a parent tries to discipline their child, whether it's spanking or putting cayenne pepper on their tongue, hardly waterboarding. It's made to look as if this is the end of this is the apocalypse.
There's a larger reason, and I do talk about it in the book, and that is the undermining of parental authority is very important if you want to create a greater secular, even socialist society. And so it's really important to make sure that, and this is actually in keeping with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which has been adopted all over the world except by the United States and Somalia. Our current president feels very strongly that we are behind in not adopting the Convention on the Rights of the Child. But it says that you may live with your parents if it's in your best interest. It doesn't say you may stay with your parents unless there is some sort of abuse or neglect. And so the Convention on the Rights of the Child, promoted by the UN, is a way to even further promote government intervention into the lives of individual families. It's a big issue and something that in our United States mostly homeschoolers know about, but really it's a bigger issue for all of us because that is the movement toward intervening, telling us how we can parent our children, telling us what's best for discipline.
There's also this very pernicious undercurrent that I'm seeing across the culture, and it is the acknowledgement and advancement of children, even infants, as sexual beings. The Health and Human Services Department recently put out a guideline where they describe infants as sexual beings. What is this about? What is the end game here?
It's the promotion of the agenda from International Planned Parenthood, and they have put out the sexual rights of children.
But to what end? Wait, to what end? I mean, we have journalists, many of my peers, and look, I was enraged as anybody else during the sexual abuse scandal, okay? Because it's an outrage that you would target a child in any way, but particularly in a sexual way. Yet we have society at the same time saying, oh, but these are sexual beings, meaning we're opening a door seemingly making it permissible to look upon children as sexual objects. Isn't there something terrible and sick about this?
Completely twisted and sick. And it is, but it's the same thing that allows them then to counsel young children about birth control, contraception, abortion. It's the same reason in your newscast you're telling us that in Ireland and Scotland they're trying to figure out what constitutes a family. I mean, this is the undermining of the family. And by promoting the sexual existence of children, if you will, is all part and parcel of devaluing us as human beings. And it's a weird campaign against individuals, against dignity, but it is real, and it's what I talk about in this book.
We have an email, someone asking if you saw this Nightline primetime special that recently aired on ABC called My Extraordinary Family. I happen to come across this, as did apparently this correspondent. And they're saying, you know, we have a 10-year-old girl or a 10-year-old boy depicted in this story, and at 10 years old, he's decided that he's a she, and therefore is on medication, hormones, to stop the onset of puberty. What is happening to us?
It's part and parcel of this effort, and it's, believe it or not, there are people who are campaigning to dispel the myth of something called heteronormativity, which is the ideal that being heterosexual is what is normal. So believe it or not, there are those, I argue, on the left in the secular world who are very, very typically liberal, I guess. I hate to use these terms, but I don't know how else to do it, to just redefine what it means to be a human person, that our sexuality is something we choose and we could change. They are about creating an atmosphere for something they call sexual fluidity, which is that at one point in your life you might identify as this way, but at another point you might become another. And the whole notion of being gender identity, being confused, they are now trying to describe as a normal part of regular development. That just as you can't quite figure out what you want to be when you grow up, you can't quite figure out what kind of gender you are until maybe later. And which is, I mean, to me, that whole story on it defiles these children in ways that are just beyond description. If that can't be described as child abuse, I don't know what could. And yet there are people in the medical profession assisting these people to do these things. And so, you know, the idea that you would change the gender of a child while they're
mutilate that child. We won't get into the details.
Exactly. But these are the things that I talk about in this book because I think that people are really not aware. I'm trying to just expose the severity of the problem and get people to be a little bit more engaged, because I think we are, things that offend us so much we truly turn away from, and we need to know more.
You take on the notion of children as global citizens, which is advanced in a lot of classrooms, the multicultural approach to learning. Now, Marybeth, there are some people I know watching saying, what is the problem of exposing children to other cultures? You in the book take on Grover and Sesame Street because he goes to an Arab village and shows you what they eat and how they behave and the burqas and everything. What's wrong with exposing kids to these cultures?
No child in the world needs to be taught to be curious. I don't know one. You don't probably have any at home. I'm telling you, that the notion that children have to be trained to be curious about other cultures is absurd. But Sesame Street, you know, and in this book, you know, I'm going to end up being that wacko mom who picks on Sesame Street. Let me just say this. Loved Sesame Street. I don't think I'd have taken a shower for 9 years if it weren't for Sesame Street. So I'm not telling people not to watch Sesame Street.
Nothing wrong with the Children's Television Workshop, except
this. Back in the day, Sesame Street was a great show about learning numeracy and literacy, especially directed at kids who were underprivileged and needed some assistance. Now, if you go on their website, they have a very different mission, and it is about promoting the idea of global citizenship and the idea of multiculturalism and diversity.
And you think but only in
America.
To what?
Well, but only in America. There is no American character that Sesame Street promotes. If you look at Sesame Street's international programming, because they have original shows in also other countries, in those places they promote the national character of the other places where they work. But in the United States, we don't want to promote a national character because that's jingoistic and that's overly national, and you know that's the idea of American exceptionalism is not something they would want to promote on the show. So, and that's what bothers me, is that we're losing a distinct American character. And let's keep in mind that America was founded for religious freedom. So we are going to give up something that our kids don't even know they're giving up, Raymond. They don't even know enough about it. One of the things I talk about extensively in the book is civic education, and our kids don't have it. And so, you know, they won't even know what they're giving away before it's too late. So
let's move on to the children of the nanny state, which is something that you're very highly critical of. Obviously, if you have families breaking down and no one to care for these children, someone has to, and the government steps in. Now, there are a lot of people who would say, you've got poor people, they're broken families. Isn't it the responsibility of the government and the nation to step in and help that child be educated and provided basic needs provided for?
When the government does that, it undermines the very nature of our Christian calling to take care of one another. And so you see time and time again in lots of studies where people are giving less, where they are less generous and less concerned about taking care of their fellow man in their community, because they know the government is stepping in and doing it for them. So it's actually a dangerous way to kind of assault and undermine our own desire to care for one another in this community of the world we live in. But more than that, it is ridiculous that kids are growing up believing that the federal government of the United States of America can solve every one of their everyday problems. 69% of kids, teenagers, believe that the government has a significant role to play in stopping the problem of childhood obesity. I don't know if they think like a government agent is going to walk behind and take a candy bar from them or how that will work. But if you don't want to be obese, that is really a personal decision you make about your own good health. And so we have to stop looking at our government to solve our everyday problems. But the problem is now, and we know that so many people are needy and out of work and needing assistance. So many families are becoming dependent that they are losing their spirit and it's becoming very disheartening, I think, for people in their dignity.
They're losing their dignity and their personal sense of personal responsibility and self-control.
And self-reliance. And so it's a big part and parcel of what I write about in this book. But our kids' generation is definitely being taught to believe and growing up to believe that that's normal, natural, what they should expect. And so that whole cradle to grave thing is a big part of their obligation.
I want to go, before we go to some solutions, let's go to Lucy in Connecticut. Go ahead, Lucy. What's your question?
I totally agree with, thank you, Raymond, for taking my call.
Okay.
I just totally agree with Nancy State.
Marybeth.
Marybeth, I'm sorry.
Close.
That's okay.
Go ahead.
What's the name of your book? I want to get it.
Kool-Aid. Just remember Kool-Aid.
Don't let the kids drink the Kool-Aid. Go ahead quickly, Lucy. What's your question?
Okay, my question is, really quickly, I lost custody of my son to my mother because I had a relapse of being post-traumatic stress from having had an abortion my mother took me to about 20 years ago in 91. And I never saw the face of abortion or let alone ultrasound of my son or my children. I now have a 6-year-old son who now, because of my mother also having mental issues, is now being redetermined for custody because she left him home alone and went to work.
Well, what's your question, Lucy? Go ahead.
Make a long story short, I myself, being looked at as a second class citizen like Terry Schiavo because of my disability. I just want to let you know, you're absolutely right. She forced me to have him in daycare because I was financially dependent on her. Now I'm getting myself somewhat independent financially from her, and I have to be reevaluated psychologically. But thanks be to God through Divine Mercy and, Rachel's Vineyard and, of course, CareNet and all the other, just healing process through the grace of God and suffering like John Paul II, his example and all the other saints. I'm relying on God and trusting in His. Okay.
All right, Lucy. Thanks. And God, thank you, Lucy. I mean, it's a great story.
You know what she's got? Yeah. It's so illustrative of how complicated families are.
Yep.
And how much they are really hurt by some of the social trends that have happened to us. The abortion trend in our country has destroyed and hurt so many hearts, and you really hear that in her voice and in her question. Yeah. And I think that people are needy. They have issues. Families have problems they have to overcome. And I'm not suggesting people should never get help or shouldn't be rely on resources. That's not what I'm saying. I am suggesting, though, that our kids, as they grow up, believing some of these messages about what's okay, for example, abortion or premarital sex, or all the the unbelievable values that are being foisted on them without their knowledge.
Let's go to some questions here, Marybeth, and then before we get to some solutions. I have a correspondent that writes in, Letitia from Connecticut. As a literature teacher in a good Catholic middle school, I was alarmed at the zeal with which tweens were reading dark-themed novels like Twilight. When I asked them what attracted them to the books, they admitted it was the element of danger. For example, in the Twilight series, the fact that Edward wants to kill Bella and drink her blood is part of the appeal. This attraction to the dark side puzzles and frightens me. Where does this trend originate, and how do we combat it?
I don't know where it originates. I suppose in the dark heart of the human sinful nature. I mean,
and
really.
the Twilight books are probably the least offensive of this brand of books.
And I didn't let my tween read them and everybody was reading them and seeing the movies, and we were the odd guy out. It's what else is new. I guess if she's watching, I'm sorry. But I'm not. So I do think that. I think, though, that this culture has glamorized evil in every way that we can think of. We've glamorized evil. So it's the hypersexual culture, it's the gay agenda, it's entertainment that just feeds kind of the dark side of the soul. And we really need to recognize that there are consequences to that. And you can't grow up reading stuff that entertains you in a very dark and sort of flirting with danger way and not recognize that that's going to have some sort of outcome on your soul. You know, so we're not immersing our kids in stuff that uplifts their soul. And when we get to the part about solutions, I have a big one for that.
Okay. Cindy from Massachusetts. Very quickly, Cindy, and concisely. What's your question, Cindy?
Hi, Raymond. My question is to go back to the beginning of your conversation where you both spoke about outside forces trying to erode the family as it is. But what do you do when you have good, well-meaning Catholic families that are opting to send their kids off to sport instead of religious education? I'm a long-time religious educator, and that's been a real difficulty for a lot of parishes, and that too erodes at the foundation of God and families. And that's not really an outside force, but that's just parents not saying, you know, hey, let's do the religious ed and
it's a trend.
do sports in the summer or something.
Yeah, they're making a decision there.
Okay, so one of the things I do talk about in this book, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, is that we really we cannot look at what we've got with this generation of kids and just kind of shake our heads and go, wow, what are you going to do? We are not walking the walk as a culture and as parents, as families. We need to do more to set an example for our children, and it is not okay to make sure that they are like the star of the soccer team, but that their soul has not been attended to. So I do get that it's a frustration. But it's also, again, it has deeper, larger consequences. You can't be inattentive about the media your kids consume or the fact that you're not getting the religious ed in, and then expect that there's no consequence from that.
How much, in the book you talk about the media consumption of children and how detrimental this can be, not only to their own formation, but to the family in general. Almost 10 hours, what is it, almost 10 hours a day?
It can be up to 10 hours a day. It's the average is, Kaiser Family Foundation did their study, Generation M, media consumption of kids 8 to 18, and it's 7.5 hours a day roughly, but that doesn't include multitasking, media multitasking, so that would be watching TV while you're on the internet, and it also didn't include text messaging at all, which is another hour and a half.
Which feels...
So you can actually get it, it's pretty much every waking hour. I mean, it's if they're not in school, and even when they are.
All right, so how do you combat that? How do you, I mean, all their friends are doing it, they're on the bus doing it, they're in school doing it, they communicate via text.
Well, and the technology, the issue is, I mean, technology in itself is morally benign. It's what they're consuming that matters. And so first thing we have to do with our children, and I've said it every time I've been on this show, is we need to be better filters. I would now use the word censors for our children. I think in the past I've tried to just be gentle about it and said, you know, you need to be a filter for your kids. You need to be a censor for your kids. I'm now advocating censorship. Okay, not by the government.
In the home.
In the home, in the home. And not just in the home, wherever you go. If you're in the pizza parlor and it's, you know, the sports bar atmosphere and they've got the TV on and they're watching something vile that you don't want your kids exposed to, stand up and ask the manager to turn it off. I mean, wherever you are is where you are. And you need to make sure that what your kids consume in media reflects your values, supports your values. We have to stop as a culture kind of going tisk, 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 look at these kids, what's happening with kids today, and wonder why we have bullying, why we have hypersexual behavior, why we have premature adolescence and all these issues, and wonder why we're not getting it done. We have to rise up. So yes, censoring the media and making sure that what comes into the home is appropriate and valuable. But the biggest thing I'm calling my call to action in this book is we need to instill virtue in our children. This nation of ours was built for a virtuous people. Ben Franklin said, this government we've built is only good for a virtuous people.
Right, and Sam Adams and company believed the underbelly of that, the foundation of that virtue was religious formation.
Exactly. Because without our religion, we have no moral compass. And so we can't use, I mean, without religion, the morality is all relative. It's what you think is good or bad, what I think is right or wrong. And we aren't giving our kids that moral compass, and that's what's missing.
We were getting some emails earlier about this piece in the USA Today this week, and it talked about spying on kids. Some parents who've now installed devices, put them in the backpack so they can track the kid, cameras in the house, in the different areas. What do you think of that?
I think it's pathetic. I think it's pathetic that people need that, but unfortunately, parenting is a skill in our culture that is so completely lost. They don't even know what to do anymore, so now they're, you know, putting a camera in the backpack. You know, it's really cheaper and easier. Have a spine. Like a spine is free, okay? Like a parenting spine. You know, I mean, it's very frustrating to hear those things because I know that what's really hurting in that situation is our children. They want leadership in the home. And putting a camera in your kid's backpack is not leadership.
You talk in this book about restoring and renewing our children's innocence. How do you renew innocence once it's lost?
Again, it's that, well, once it's lost, it's
once
tough
it's
to
lost,
do.
it's gone.
Yeah. Well, what we need, you know, yes and no. I think that many families can, you know, parents and grandparents and people can read this book and decide to regroup a little bit and say, you know, we have some work to do, first of all, to teach you about where you live and what our nation is about and what you're blessed with, what our values are here as Americans and as Catholic Christians, and to really kind of promote a resurgence in that in our own homes. That's the place where it begins.
Final call, Danielle from Rhode Island. You've got 2 minutes. Quickly, Danielle.
Oh, okay. I'm a single mom, 3 little boys. How do we, does your book give advice, or how do we raise 3 little boys in a world that teaches there is no gender, everything you talked about, gender and the family structure that's disappearing?
Yeah.
Very good.
Great
Thank you,
question,
Danielle.
and so concise.
See that?
Bless your heart.
Brevity. I love that.
Yeah,
Go
she's
ahead.
good. All right, that's a big issue I discuss in this book, so you'll want to get it and learn what I've learned, because I did the research for you, so you don't have to. It's a huge problem because there is this, again, we're feeding this notion that gender is a choice you make, which is hilarious to me, because up until now we've heard that sexual orientation is not a choice you make. Oh, you're just born with it, you can't help it. But now gender apparently is a choice you can make, so I don't even know how to quantify that, but there you go. So we do need to know about it so you can fight the trend.
And it's coming at all sides. I mean, parents are really, I mean, it's the pop culture, it's the stuff that are being taught in school. It's also even fashion. We see in the Wall Street Journal today, you know, we used to make fun, Laura Ingram and I were making fun of this a year ago. You know, the merces, the man purses, the manacles, the bracelets men are wearing, all these things. Well, now,
man-prees.
Yeah, but now the Oxford Dictionary is actually including these terms, and the fashion industry is appropriating them because, again, it's gender smudging, even with the things we carry, wear, and purchase.
Right. So we've just become this big androgynous nation that doesn't really have, because it's not, you know, it's offensive to be one or the other, right? It's crazy. But it's something we have to teach our kids, and we have to really help them understand that you were made by God to be one or the other for a specific purpose, for His purposes, and that's what's missing.
And there's a title for your next book, Androgenation. Thank you, Marybeth. Pleasure to have you on as always. For more on Marybeth Hicks and her Family Events e-newsletter, which is fantastic, visit her website, marybethhicks.com. Her latest book, Don't Let the Kids Drink the Kool-Aid, Confronting the Left's Assault on Our Family's Faith and Freedom from Regnery, is available at bookstores everywhere and at all the usual online outlets. When we return, Father George Rutler joins us from New York to talk about his firsthand memories of 9/11 and the aftermath, and we mark the 10th anniversary of the terrorist attacks with a little hope. The World Over Live returns in a moment.
Unself-conscious, unbound, unstoppable, and unstopped expression, almost tearing off of some kind of repression with regard to showing one's religious faith. You know, from one end of New York to the other, I would walk in September 11th and days afterwards. I would walk from uptown on 96th Street all the way as far as I could get downtown. And I gotta tell you, the whole town was full of votive candles and pictures of saints and crucifixes and poems to God. It was so enormously moving. It was as if people didn't care. They had been reduced to their basics, and their basic beliefs came out.
God was very much there. God was on the plains. God was in those buildings. God was in Shanksville, the Pentagon. God abandoned no one. But evil is a reality, we know that. Our Lord dealt with evil directly in the Gospels, and we deal with it today, and the battle continues. And God will not allow the evil to stand. And the way we combat that is through prayer, through the living out of the Gospels, and being there for each other.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Tonight is a sad occasion in that we mark the 10th anniversary of an event that's left deep scars on the United States and around the world. On September 11th, terrorists drove planes into the Pentagon here in Washington, into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and into the Twin Towers in Lower Manhattan. My next guest was near Ground Zero on 9/11 doing his part to help the wounded and the dying. To share his memories of that day and the lasting impact, we're pleased to be joined by an EWTN host of over 20 years, the pastor of the Church of Our Saviour in New York, Father George Rutler. Father Rutler, thanks for joining us.
Hello, Raymond.
Hello, Raymond. And happy 30th anniversary. This is the 30th anniversary of Father's ordination, so we're pleased you could join us on this august occasion.
Thank you very much, Raymond.
Now, Father, tell me, how did you come to be downtown on 9/11 10 years ago when your parish was more than 40 blocks up near Grand Central?
Well, in New York, a block is like a mile. It makes a big difference. But I was right by Grand Central, and I heard the one plane go over. I work with the fire police department, so the minute I got word, we thought at first it was an accident, and I ran down there. I wasn't prepared to run. I was wearing my dress shoes, and that was about 3 miles. I got there after the first tower had come down. I saw it coming down, but then I was there when the second came down. Thousands of people, of course, fleeing the scene. So it was like bucking the tide, and it made it difficult to make much progress when we got closer down there. And the whole area very soon was sealed off. Reporters and cameramen, everybody were not allowed in. They tried to get in. They had no idea at first what was happening. They had no measure of the scale of things. And when they did realize, they got out very quickly. All communication seemed to shut down. Towards the end of the day, I was surprised coming back uptown. The camera crew from one news agency asked to interview me. I was all covered with this, everybody was covered with this white dust. We all looked like ghosts. And they had they still didn't understand what had fully happened. And I remember the interviewer asked me, how many did you see people killed? I said, yes, many. How many? Hundreds? I remember they said hundreds, and I said, no, thousands. And they all began to weep. Cameramen, scriptmen, technicians, they all began to weep. It was very hard to grasp the scale of things.
What was the spiritual message you took from that day, from that moment? I mean, did you put this in any context? You've said in interviews this was like a black and white movie, except for the red blood everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, when it was happening, I think everybody was in shock. And most people who were there can remember, I think every hour of that day, even though it was 10 years ago, people just behaved, I think, according to their normal personalities. First of all, people wanted to save their lives. It was very, very terrible to see the people jumping from the buildings. That was very terrible. One was moved by the heroism, really the lack of thought for oneself. The firemen and the police and the first responders are going into the buildings.
You were hearing a lot of confessions of these first responders, right?
Well, they knew that they were facing death. They wanted to be absolved. It was like a battlefield. It was a battlefield. Even in the midst of all the smoke and everything, it was very hard to absorb what was happening. And I thought for a moment I was on the sound set for some World War I film. And as in a battle, one gives general absolution. And that's what I did. And I still remember the faces of those men going in. We tried, a policeman and I were on a golf cart. I don't know where he got in the golf cart. And we tried to go into an adjacent building, but it burst into flame and began to come down, and we knew no one in there could have survived. But I always remember the faces of those men and women. I remember the look on the doctors. There were about 50 ambulances that arrived very, very quickly, and they were all lined up in perfect order. But there seemed to be at one moment at which all the medical personnel realized that they weren't going to have many wounded, that everybody was dead. And there was this, again, this incredulous look on them, and these were the medical people, and they were clearly
Father,
in shock.
I want to, before we go, we only have 1 minute left. Before we go, what is the spiritual lesson that we should take from that day and reflect on 10 years later?
Well, that was we forget, 2001 was the first year of the third millennium. 2000 was the last year of the 20th century. The whole world changed, but truth perdures, truth is objective, and if we want to live in denial of that, well, we learn the hard way, that there is good and that there is evil. And people are capable of the most wretched things, and that they're capable of the most heroic things, and we have a choice. But if we deny the reality of evil, we allow evil to spread. This was not an attack on an economic system or on a political system. This was an attack of evil on Judeo-Christian civilization. And we are engaged in that struggle now. And to deny that risks our very souls, and certainly does discredit to those who heroically offered their lives to save the lives of others.
Very good. Father George Rutler, thank you for being here, and again, happy anniversary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, last week we got another incredible response to Jenny Stepanek's appearance on the program. As we commemorate 9/11, we have something very special to share with you. Ms. Stepanek is allowing us to air a bit of footage that's never been seen before. On 9/11, her son, Matty Stepanek, the little poet and peace advocate, wrote a poem called For Our World. It's a call for peace and prayer. He recorded it at a book signing for a meeting of Nobel laureates in Rome. It was late fall of 2003, and shortly after this was recorded, Matty Stepanek's heart stopped after a long battle with a rare form of muscular dystrophy. Here's Matty Stepanek.
Peace can be achieved if we choose to live 3 simple steps. First, we must choose to make peace an attitude. We must want it and make it something that truly matters in our hearts and in our lives. For if we say it, but we don't feel it, it is empty and it will not happen. And then we must choose to make peace a habit. We can't just think it and then it happens. We have to live it and demonstrate it. We have to make it a part of our everyday lives. Have peace in everything we do, at home, at work, everywhere, at all times. We must think gently, speak gently, and live gently. And then we must finally choose to make peace a reality. We must share it and spread it throughout the world. We can't just live it in ourselves and among friends and family, the people we know and trust. We have to go throughout the world to people we know and don't know, even people we disagree with. And we must dedicate peace to ourselves and to the world. I would like to close with a poem. It is a prayer for peace called For Our World. For our world, we need to stop. Just stop. Stop for a moment before anybody says or does anything that may hurt anyone else. We need to be silent. Just silent. Silent for a moment before we forever lose the blessing of songs that grow in our hearts. We need to notice. Just notice. Notice for a moment before the future slips away into ashes and dust of humility. Stop, be silent, and notice. In so many ways, we are the same. Our differences are unique treasures. We are a mosaic of gifts to nurture, to offer, to accept. We need to be, just be. Be for a moment, kind and gentle, innocent and trusting, like children and lambs, never judging or vengeful, like the judging and vengeful. And now let us pray, differently yet together, before there is no earth, no life, no chance for peace. Thank you. Thank you very much. And peace is possible. God bless.
If you'd like to translate Maddie's poem into other languages and spread his message to others, go to maddieonline.com. That's all the time we have. You can always find me at raymondarroyo.com, and make sure you check out my Facebook page. It's there on the left-hand side. Until next week, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. May all of those who lost their lives on 9/11 rest in peace. Their families remain in our prayers. And on behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye now.